Corinthians. Last Sunday we started off with a big bang. We heard the passage before this about how God makes us jars of clay that are treasure, that God can work through normal human beings to do incredible things. And it was wonderful that when we heard this reading last week, we had a witness from Derek Thompson, who's a member of our New Life band, and he spoke about how God works through him, even in the midst of his struggle with addiction. So today we continue, and I wanted to tell you a little bit more about 2 Corinthians. So as you may know, this is a letter that Paul wrote to a Christian community in the city of Corinth. Now, for some background, Paul's relationship with this particular community has always been rather rocky. So he would have come to the city of Corinth initially and shared the good news about Jesus Christ in public spaces, and then as people responded, they would have formed this community that would become the church in Corinth. And so Paul would then help the community to get started, and then he would move on, go to another city and start spreading the good news there. And the way that he would keep in contact with these old communities that he had already set up was through letters. Now, the first time that he heard again about the city in Corinth and the community there after he left, he heard that things weren't going so well. And so he wrote them the letter, which is 1 Corinthians. And he told them about how they should change their ways and they needed to return to the message that he had taught them initially, and answered some of the questions that they had about the life of faith. And then later on, as he continued his ministry, he heard again about the city of Corinth and the community there, and once again things weren't going well. And so then he wrote a second letter, and this is not in the Bible. We only hear it referenced to. So this second letter is kind of like when you get upset with somebody who maybe you know real well, maybe it's somebody in your family or at work, and you send them a text message, or you leave a voicemail, or you send an email, and right after it's sent, you go, oh gosh, that's going to make things about 1,000 times worse. I need to go talk to this person. So Paul sent the letter, what he calls the letter of tears, the second letter, and he went, oh my gosh, that was a bad idea. And so he started chasing down the messenger who was sending it to the city of Corinth, and he met the messenger on the way back. And he asked the messenger, how did it go? How did they receive it? And he found out that it went not as bad as he thought, but that he felt that it was still necessary to write yet a third letter. And so that's what this 2 Corinthians letter is. This is his third letter to the community, and he's trying to once again shore up their faith, help cement what they understand about the gospel of Jesus, and establish a strong relationship with them, especially since things have not been so smooth so far. So in this letter, we hear a lot of kind of deeper theological ideas. So one of the ways we're going to try and look at these theological ideas is we're going to have a guest speaker. The guest speaker is not here in person. Hopefully we'll be able to hear her on the screen. And this guest speaker is a pastor of the Lutheran Church. Her name is Nadia Bolz-Weber. Nadia Bolz-Weber is a pretty famous Lutheran pastor. She's known across the United States because of her style. So a little bit about her. She grew up in Colorado, I believe, in an evangelical family. And then during her 20s, she started having trouble with addiction, specifically with alcoholism. And then in 1996, she was able to become clean and sober, and she started to feel the call to become a pastor. And as she followed this call, she realized that she was kind of a different pastor than some of the other Lutheran pastors that she ran into. And so she founded her own community that's called the House for All Sinners and Saints. It's in Denver. And this community is known for being very open and welcoming to people who might not normally feel welcome in a congregation. Specifically, they're very open and welcoming to the LGBTQ community, that is, those who are gay and transgender. And they're also very welcoming to people who have doubts or even say that they're atheists. Interesting. So her style as a pastor, you'll see on the video, she's got lots of tattoos, she's got kind of short, spunky hairstyle. Sometimes when she preaches, she uses curse words. Not today. We'll save that for another week. I'll prepare you again when it happens. But today she doesn't use any curse words, but she speaks in a very frank, kind of down-to-earth manner, which I think is really easy to understand. So that's why I am introducing her as our guest speaker to help introduce some of these theological concepts in a down-to-earth way. So this video comes to us from Facebook. It's from a series about women who have made an impact on the United States. So she fits in that category, and we'll listen to what she has to say.
As a clergy person, I'd like to welcome you all to the apocalypse. Pull up a chair and make yourself uncomfortable. If when you think of an apocalypse, you picture a scary, doom-filled punishment from above, you're not alone. Originally, though, apocalyptic literature existed not to scare the bejesus out of children so that they would be good boys and girls, but to proclaim a big, hope-filled idea that dominant powers are not ultimate powers. Empires fall, tyrants fade, systems die, God's still around. In Greek, the word apocalypse means to uncover, to peel away, to show what's underneath. That's what this country has been experiencing in recent months. There's not been a sudden uptick in sexual misconduct and assault in our country. The Me Too and Time's Up movements are simply exposing what was already there. The male domination at the center of the sexual harassment issue is being revealed apocalyptically and in prime time. Wokeness and policy change are a start, but not enough to dig out the full infection. This is why I welcome our moment of uncovering. We need to see how deep the heresy of domination runs, and then remind one another that dominant powers are not ultimate powers. So if those who came before looked to the Bible to justify their dominance, then let us look to it to justify our dignity. It's in there. Theology and liturgy are just too potent to be left to those who would use them, even unwittingly, to justify and protect their own dominance. And sometimes the origin of the harm really can be the most powerful source of healing.
So, what does the apocalypse have to do with 2 Corinthians? The tie-in here is that both the reading and this video is talking about how things aren't what they appear. When we look around, when we watch the news, when we see what's going on in our communities, it can be very easy to think that other people are in charge other than God. And to think that certain powers, dominant powers is what she calls them, have more power than God does because they seem to have more of an influence on our lives. The way Paul says it in the letter, he says, let's look. He says, on the outside, it often looks like things are falling apart on us. So I'd like you to think about, what are some dominant powers in our lives and in our community? Or what are some ways that things seem to be falling apart that people could easily point to as a reason why God doesn't appear to be in charge?
All the shootings.
Shootings, violence, absolutely.
Corruption.
Corruption. Does anything specific come to mind?
We took money from the Boy Scouts, we took money from.
So like financial corruption, political
township,
corruption.
right.
Mhm.
Homelessness and hunger.
Homelessness and hunger. Absolutely. Things seem to be falling apart.
I think greed.
Greed.
Corporate greed.
Yeah, absolutely. In the
People for
business
themselves
world.
and not think about their employees, not even a little bit.
Right. The CEO seems to have all the power, doesn't he, or she?
Medical, the pharmaceutical CEOs,
Mm-hmm.
that's ridiculous. How much money they make.
Yes, and how much they charge people who are struggling to get
Right.
medications they need to live.
A 50-cent pill they charge $8 for, that's bad. That's bad.
Absolutely. Are there any other dominant powers or ways that things seem to be falling apart? Liz, I see you thinking about something.
There's so many every time. It's hard.
Mhm.
People that do, I would say, fraud.
Fraud.
People that are committing fraud.
Mhm. That was kind of what Julie was talking about, I think. Yeah.
Or they set up companies for people to give money in there.
And they're
There is no
There's no
company or-
cause, right,
Yeah.
yes, they're setting up, so supposedly they're raising money
Yeah.
for a cause, but
Yeah.
really they're raising money for number one. Yeah. I think too, now that you mentioned that, Liz, I think of some of the charter schools. Some of them are really great, but some of them really are a racket. And they take advantage of families and really not abuse children, but abuse the education system, and then children suffer from that. Absolutely. So there's all these things that we can point to, right? That it seems like dominant powers have the control. Seems like things are falling apart. And yet she says in this video, this idea of apocalypse, it's not necessarily about the end of the world, it's about the idea that God always has the last say. And that all of these dominant powers that we can point to, they are not going to last forever, but God will. And one of the things that we can do as Christians, as people of faith, is to point to the ways in which God is working. And so I would like us to think about now, where are some of the ways that you see God at work? And as Paul said, unfolding grace, making new life. What are some things that we can point to and share with people?
Quakertown Community Outreach.
Quakertown Community Outreach.
We just had a line last night, and the community was supporting Britta's board.
So Quakertown Community Outreach, for those of you who don't know, is a local organization that helps people who are in need, especially those who are threatened by homelessness or who are homeless. Absolutely, that's a great organization. Where else can we point to God being at work?
St. John's.
St. John's! What's some of the things that we do here at St. John's?
The block party next week.
The Block Party, which raises money for Quakertown Community Outreach. Absolutely. What else? Derek, absolutely, his witness last week about how faith has continued to be strong for him, even in the hardest times in his life. That's an inspiration. That's God at work. Yes?
I'm a Girl Scout leader, and we give back, through making baby bundles for women's groups.
Oh, awesome.
And different things.
Youth, yeah, the power that young people can do to give back to the community. I think of our confirmation group and some of the conversations that we have there, and it's just so inspiring to hear these young people really truly care about the world. I remember we had a gathering a while back, and we were praying for each other and for the world, and I didn't even know that this was happening at the time, but one of the young people was praying for the countries that are now again being affected by Ebola. I thought, wow, here's a young person who's really informed about what's happening in the world and knows that God's presence is needed here.
Just the parents, teachers, and leaders that are teaching the youth and adults in the same way, just, reminding them
Absolutely.
about it and their faith.
Parents and teachers and folks who lead young people, and remind them of their faith and of the good things that are happening, and help lead them. Absolutely. So, this particular gospel today, how is God at work in us? God is at work in us, making new life. Not just in the things that we do, but in the words that we say. And that is why we say what we believe, because it makes a difference. For example, when Derek shared his story, that really moved people. And you can do the same thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you went through a trial time and, something as dramatic as what Derek went through with his addiction. But I'm sure that you can think of a time in your life when God was there with you by your side, making new life. And that, if you share it with others, can be very powerful for them. So that is why we say what we believe, because it's our call to expose where God is at work in the world.